Hello, Joe. Thank you so much for agreeing to be part of this research project as part of the doctoral dissertation titled Social Inclusion and Participation in the Design of the Post-2015 Agenda, now known as Agenda 2030, and the Sustainable Development Goals. Your role and experience in the post-2015 process will provide significant input about the level of social inclusion of this development process. Hello, Joe. Can you give us your name and affiliation, please?
Sure thing. Thank you for the opportunity to respond and to comment, Juan. My name is Joseph Cornelius Donelly, and I'm the permanent delegate to the UN for Caritas Internationalis, which is a confederation of 165 members working in 200 countries and territories around the world.
Thanks again. Truly a pleasure to be here with you. In your opinion, what is the value or importance of social inclusion and participation during the design of the post-2015 development agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals?
I think the value and importance is based on the fact that we respond to a world in need. We're very cognizant of things are not well everywhere, but we have the capacity, the resources to help more people consistently, and help there to be fewer people who suffer miserably. And I think the MDGs were an effort to address that, and they did it in a lot of ways, and I worked on that campaign. And the intentionality of this campaign is that more can be done, more should be done, but most imperatively, there was not and still is not enough participation of the ordinary people. And my personal mantra working at the UN around all this is every voice counts, and when I'm perhaps frustrated, I say every damn voice counts.
I would agree with that. How has social participation influenced the post-2015 process, and what mechanisms were the most important to you?
I think that the statement of hopes and aspirations of the post-2015 process included the high-ranking value of consultations. And so consultations did go on for about 3 years and got pretty intense, more so toward the end. And yet the challenge was and is, in terms of a valued mechanism, did they really happen consistently, and can we verify that these were not just voices, these were people who offered an experience, an opinion, a time and a location and a name, and I would say that's, for me, one of the more compelling challenges today.
In your view, was the design of the post-2015 agenda an inclusive process, and what evidence is there?
I think that the design intended for it to be an inclusive process, and certainly the outreach at the national level and the consultations being held in many, many different places created a certain kind of euphoria and enthusiasm. So they happened, and there were inputs, and there were thousands, if not millions, of people who responded. But again, my question would be, what's the link back to those people?
Okay, and so how familiar are you with the results of, say, the My World Survey, the UN system consultations, civil society consultations, the UN Global Pulse Big Data tools? I mean, have you participated, interacted, designed, or implemented any of these instruments? And to your opinion, were these results transparent and accessible?
As a good diplomat, I would say yes to everything. I did it, I shared it, I promoted it. We had a Caritas working group that promoted it further nationally and regionally, and it helped. It helped engage people to believe that they could do something and that their voice counted, which was our premise, that if you don't speak, you can't complain because you didn't. But the end result left me with the question, all of that compilation of information, was it going to be responsibly integrated into the next steps? Or was it just going to be, well, done deal, we got lots of information? And big data, I'm willing to say it, big data scares me sometimes because I wonder how personalized it actually is in terms of impact and then follow-up mechanisms.
Do you think the results were transparent and accessible?
I think they were somewhat transparent and somewhat accessible, but I think we could go further.
Do you think the results of the aforementioned tools were useful or easy to make sense of?
I think an honest answer is to say yes, they were useful. Yes, we could make some sense of them, but the question would be if we put it under the category which was part of, I think, the intention. Hopefully the intention wasn't just to fill in the blanks. The intention was to learn lessons. And these were living, dynamic experiences of real human people in real human places. And I think that the post-2015 SDG conundrum today is, we learned a lot. Are we still listening, or have we decided what the answers need to be? And took the question marks off and put exclamation points.
In your view, were the results presented in a timely manner to policymakers? Did they have any impact on the design of the post-2015 agenda? Do you think the SDG proposal is inclusive?
I think that the results of the couple of years campaigning, and certainly the last 3 months of the intergovernmental negotiations, were a compelling challenge to say, holy smokes, if we know all this, what are we going to do with it? How will we use it? And I think that the conclusion of the intergovernmental negotiations and the movement toward the General Assembly and the big meetings in September 2015 were that this was overwhelming evidence that more can be done, more could be done, more should be done, more must be done. And are we willing to commit ourselves to do it and find the funding that would make some of these things as process and as deliverables really possible?
So do you think the policymakers did have access then in time, if this process was 2 years long, to the results?
I think like any good process, you have a beginning, you have a middle, and you have that awkward and sometimes uncomfortable ending. It had to conclude. And I think the tension of the last days, the last meetings of it, were extremely tense with squeezing it all in. And I would use one, perhaps for me, imperative example. In the very last minutes of the intergovernmental negotiations, and since, has been the question of the place of migration in development. And with a world crisis in 2015 and now in 2016 of so many peoples on the move and the messages that come to us from member states, it's very clear that many are saying we didn't clearly address migration completely enough, openly enough, and comfortably enough to say we cannot force this into a box. It's bigger than what we expected. It requires more time, more money, more analysis, and we're going to have to find a way to do it. Hence, perhaps a smart outcome has been that, okay, so now we'll have a summit meeting on the large movements of refugees and migrants in 2016, which perhaps was not an intended end result of those meetings.
Do you feel personally, or as an individual represented, did you feel during the SDG process, what could have been improved in terms of social participation during the design process of the post-2015 agenda and the SDGs?
Being a representative of a very large, significant international NGO, I would have to say I felt very welcomed into the process, but perhaps far more welcomed in the process than an awful lot of other people would not have felt. So I expected more of the process because I had access to it, and I have to imagine that some of the people who were negative about the process overall, it also has to do with the fact that they did not have that access. So I'm grateful for the access I had, the access it enabled me to pass on to my colleagues in countries around the world and in different kinds of processes. And many of our colleagues came to New York and participated at the global level as well as from their regional basis. So there was satisfaction there, but satisfaction also whets your appetite then to want more.
So what do you think could have been improved in terms of social participation during the design of the post-2015 agenda and the SDGs?
I think we needed and could still use a more balanced approach to grassroots voices, community leadership, civil society coordination, that those are three dimensions of the community, of every voice counts, that possibly were forced together or rushed without adequate time for significant participation at the most grassroots level.
Can you describe at least 2 examples of programs and or policies designed to foster social inclusion and participation? Outside of this process, of course.
So we as Caritas and I as an advocate and as involved in peacemaking, reconciliation, forgiveness, goal number 16 is all about peace, security, global citizenship. I think that at the most basic communal, cultural levels, what I've learned is it's easy to say there should be peace, there should be forgiveness, there should be reconciliation, but to actually deliver transitional justice, I have to sit here and look at that person and let that person see me seeing him or her, and not be ashamed to have that question, and not shame them just because I asked the question, but make them own their responsibility for the role that they took in it. That goes on in some of these community-based projects, and it's transformative. And it can change the way schools are done. It can change the way farming is done. So in essence, it has a lot more to do with peace building than one might imagine, but it's real education, and it generates real transformation. And I think that is the ultimate goal of this new design, is to say, what can we deliver, what can we help people deliver to each other that really transforms the society the way they want to live in it, not the way we think they should live in it.
And can you describe at least 2 cases where inclusion and participation were decisive in designing inclusive and successful public policies?
I guess when I was answering the last question, I had a lot of Africa in mind and experiences. I think that to answer this question, I would have something of the Middle East and something of Latin America in mind. So I think that the Colombia advocacy, the Colombia peace process has been 50 years of a war is right on the table now, and it's a marvelous case for implementing the SDGs, because it has brought people to the table in a way that has taken decades, and now it's saying we all can compromise, we all have something to offer, but at the same time, the positive part is that it's acknowledged as an incomplete process, and even though there's a Security Council resolution around helping people do this, we still have the ability to say, is everybody involved? And will everybody be involved? And will the agreement touch the lives of all stakeholders? But at least that question's being asked this time around, as opposed to assumed that it's taken care of. So for me, that type of participatory stuff is happening. And the other side would be, I think, relative to the incredible quagmires we have in the Middle East, and despite the fact that there's still an incredible amount of violence, there are people who have found their common humanity out of their miserable suffering, and saying if we can't help each other, none of us will ever have peace. And that is propagating in the midst of these crises right now. Out of desperation, people have found something human, and that's transformative once more. And for that to make a difference in a broader way, that's a conversation that needs not just to be observed, but to really be participated in from the highest and grassroots level simultaneously, I think.
That's very interesting. Thank you so much for that. Last question. Taking into account the lessons of the post-2015 design process, can you name at least 3 recommendations to foster inclusion and participation in specific terms around the implementation of the post-2015 agenda and the SDGs?
These are not easy questions, sir. 3 recommendations to foster inclusion. I think there's no question that we need a better definition of who are youth, and we need to be very careful not to be patronizing about that. An 8-year-old who has lived through 5 wars already probably has something to say. And so we should not define children as too young and not old enough to speak, or they're 18, they're young adults now. So I think the categories around stereotyping who is a voice of the people is important. And at the other end of the spectrum, I would say, is who are the elders? In some cultures, you're an elder at 40, God help us. In some cultures, you're an elder at 60 or 70. So again, the same thing about we need, and I think this process attempted it, and it seemed to be understood by many as one of the failures, stronger participatory voices of genuinely youthful populations and genuinely elder populations, and elder not meaning unable, but elder meaning experienced and prophetic voices of the lived experience. And the last point, last group of those I would say is, I believe that people, they say that 80% of the world's population believe in some kind of God or some kind of power. And I would say there has been an inadequate and insufficient transparent dialogue with peoples of faith the world over. Peoples of 1, 2, or 3 religions, maybe, but not comprehensively. And so the issue of the role of spiritual values in people's lives and cultures could greatly influence a more integrated process of humanely responding to development needs in the 21st century, and not because one is good, better, and different, but rather because it's a factor in life. And just as culture and family life and food and sex, religion is a part of our DNA and belief. And I think my bottom line would be what makes us feel at home, what makes people be home, is probably the holiest card to make people be human one another. If I feel more at home, I'm going to welcome you. The less at home I feel, the less welcome you are, the less able I can accept you and tolerate that you are part of my world.
Well, that's very moving. Thank you so much, Joe, for participating in this interview. The content of the interview will be a part of a qualitative analysis that includes other 19 respondents from various institutions and representing diverse actors in the international community. Once again, thank you so much.
You're welcome, sir.